Every Christian is called to ministry, and life in ministry will impact your marriage and family. Join us for this important conversation on Family Vision.
Hi, my name is Ray Reno. Welcome to Family Vision with my parents, Dr. Rob and Amy Reno, strengthening families through practical, encouraging, and real conversations.
Hi, Rob Reno here with Visionary Family Ministries. Hope that your summer has been blessed and that you've been experiencing God's grace and mercy and power in your family. Well, fall is almost here, ramping back up to a new school year, and our churches are also ramping back up and with a new ministry season. And I hope that you're meaningfully involved in ministry in your local church. God wants to use all of us with the different gifts and talents and time that we have to serve our churches. And some of you may actually be involved in part-time or full-time paid ministry, perhaps even serving as a pastor or elder or deacon in your church. And ministry in our local churches, being a part of our local churches, serving Christ in ministry there, has a big impact on our families. It's not easy. It impacts our parenting, impacts our marriage. So today I wanted to play for you an interview that Amy did this past spring at the D6 conference down in Orlando. She's going to share specifically things that God has taught her over the years about being a pastor's wife, how to navigate having your family, or in her case specifically her husband, involved in pastoral ministry in the church, how that impacts her faith, how that impacts our marriage, how that impacts our kids. I know you're going to love this conversation. Here we go.
We are joined today by Miss Amy Reno. Amy's most important ministry is loving her husband and partnering with him to help their 7 children follow God. She serves with Visionary Family Ministries. She's practiced marriage and family therapy and is the author of several books, including Visionary Parenting and Not So Perfect Mom. I can definitely relate to that one. And Amy and her family, they live in West Chicago, Illinois, and I am so thrilled to have this conversation today with you.
I'm so happy to be here, Casey.
Well, selfishly, I have been looking forward to this conversation for weeks, honestly. And we were just talking, I was telling you about a friend of mine having conversations about being a pastor's wife, in knowing that this conversation was coming up. So she and I came up with some questions that as pastors' wives, we would love to hear your heart and your vision and your experience just to speak into us. And I also want to be careful because we have parents who listen to this podcast, we have church leaders, and I'm afraid that some of them might tap out by saying, hey, I'm not a pastor's wife, so I'm not going to listen. And I want to be careful of that. So what can you say to those people who are not pastors' wives that they might need to lean in and listen to this conversation?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, pastors' wives have, whether they wanted to or not, have to become experts at balancing ministry and their home. And in reality, everybody who's serving in a church at any capacity, and, they understand that tension. And I think the only difference is that pastors' wives are often in that position, not necessarily by their own choice, but they married into this whole role. And it's kind of, that's how I got here. That's not how I expected. That wasn't exactly my life plan.
Right. So there are some who get married and then become pastors, and there are some who are pastors and then get married, and those are two different things, right?
Exactly. And I just was not ever expecting to be a pastor's wife, so when this all came about, my courtship was 10 months from first date to wedding. It was quite a learning curve of, wow, what is this that I just married into? I married into a job I didn't really expect.
Right. Can you talk about some of the frustrations that pastors' wives has? I know that you talk to a lot of pastors' wives, so what are some of those things that you're hearing in conversation?
Yeah, I think one of the main ones is coming to church on Sunday morning often brings a whole set of conflicting emotions, in the sense that it's, you want to come with a heart of worship, right? And you're trying to come to let the Lord speak to you and minister to you. And at the same time, so many times I can remember just coming in to church feeling, okay, who am I going to meet that I dropped a ball with? What expectation I didn't meet. And, and let alone you've got all the same issues that a lot of other people have, especially when you have young kids. You're trying to figure out what works for all of them. But there's this sense of how many other people here am I letting down? And that was a weight that I didn't realize. I would say that was one of the biggest frustrations I had, and one I constantly hear from other pastors' wives.
Right, yeah, and I completely relate to that. And you also mentioned kids in that. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be not just a pastor's wife, but a mom, and maybe the weight that your kids might feel that people might not understand?
Well, the Lord really thankfully got hold of my heart at an early time in my parenting, my mothering, that I was really a people pleaser. And that was an idol for me in the sense that I had just been one of those people who could keep a lot of balls going in the air and didn't realize how much that my identity kind of depended on that. And as the Lord started to put that to death in my life, it made me realize that if I hadn't gone through that experience, I would be more concerned about what other people thought of my kids as opposed to what my kids needed from me. And that, I think, is very difficult for us as pastors' wives to really understand that we have to be primarily focused when it comes to our kids on how are we meeting their needs and understanding their hearts and not allowing other people's expectations on them to kind of invade our parenting and what we're expecting of our own kids.
Right. Now, we've talked about there's a lot of people who know you as a pastor's wife. You know, there are people around all the time, but this statement might surprise a lot of listeners when I say that being a pastor's wife is extremely lonely. I think it shocks people sometimes. They're like, why? You're surrounded by people all the time. People need you. But can you talk about that loneliness? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Probably 10 years in, I realized that I was spending my time with so many people, but I had very few close friends. Yeah. What was happening is that I was continually responding to people who were initiating with me, and I was answering all of these relational calls and getting coffee with this woman and, meeting with these high school girls in the youth ministry. But before I knew it, I was in many ways abandoning my friends. Like, I was never the one initiating with my friends. And the reality is they would be initiating with me and either never getting a call back or, realize I was very busy and they just stopped initiating. And that was so painful. And it taught me, one thing I'll be talking about in my workshop is just that it's helpful for us as pastors' wives to kind of keep our relationships in certain categories, in the sense that I kind of a category of ministry relationships, knowing that this is where God has me helping and walking alongside certain people that really need my support. But then to also understand, who are my fellowship relationships? Who are the relationships that when I spend time with them, I'm feeling encouraged and built up in my faith and in my spirit, and not to sacrifice those fellowship relationships. In fact, I would encourage pastors' wives to prioritize, and anybody out there, find those people in your life that you feel encouraged and build up with. Those are incredibly important relationships, and it's easy to sacrifice them when we're in our busy lives.
Yeah, you're right. Amy, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Really, it's already speaking to my heart, just knowing that I'm not alone in this, that the feelings that I have had in ministry, you're at least expressing exactly my situation or my experiences. And again, I know that you talk to a ton of pastors' wives. So if you have 60 seconds to talk to a pastor's wife, what is your one word of encouragement for her, or maybe your piece of advice for her?
I would want to encourage her that she doesn't need to reinvent herself to do this job well. That sometimes we think as pastor's wife we need to become different people. And I have a great story of a friend who is a pastor's wife who is a total introvert. Well, I am a total extrovert. And honestly, I love when I connect with her, because it sort of amazes me how God can use such totally different personalities, and how she has fulfilled this role as pastor's wife with the way God created her. And we really can learn from each other in that way, but don't put this pressure on yourself. Like, God knows who you are. He put you in this role. And that's the other thing I want to encourage women with, is that it's such a special job because God chose you. It's so amazing to me sometimes because, like I said, I didn't plan. Like, you can't like go to college and say, "Oh, my career is to be a pastor's wife."
I'd like to study.
Yeah, right. So that wasn't really an option. Yeah. Yet it became my most important role, far more than a career choice I could have made. So God chose you for this role, and therefore He will equip you, and you don't need to reinvent who you are.
Wow, yeah, that's so good. I know that you're not just passionate about being a pastor's wife, like as in the ministry, but even in your bio, you say that your first ministry is to your husband. And let's be honest, marriages are under attack in every form and fashion and every turn, especially for people who are in ministry. Can you talk to those pastors' wives about protecting their marriage? But also, could you talk to other church people about protecting the pastor and his wife in their marriage?
The enemy is intentionally focused on marriages and ministry, specifically pastor's family. So
we've seen a lot of that lately,
yes,
haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you one thing, my heart, when I hear about a pastor who's fallen or some scandal, you know what? It changes you when you're a pastor's wife. I just feel overwhelmed with compassion because it is such a difficult road. And the enemy is like, people don't understand that spiritual attack against that family. So first of all, as a pastor's wife, yes, your primary ministry is to your husband. And it's a challenging one. I mean, in the sense that it does require intentionality and time, and it requires disappointing people in your church that may expect you to be something, somewhere else or have more passion for something else. But especially when you're in the season of young kids, you don't have a lot of time beyond prioritizing your husband and your own family. So you need to understand that is your first and primary ministry, and not to allow people's expectations and opinions to sway you off of that. But then just as far as people in the church, I would just encourage people in the church to understand that the people who are ministering to you, your pastor, his wife, and his family, they need to hear appreciation. They need to hear like words of gratitude and not just words of expectation or words of this is what we're hoping that you're doing, or, oh, we were disappointed you might not be saying something harmless when you're saying, oh, we were disappointed you couldn't be at women's ministry. If those things are couched in a lot more compassion and understanding, along with thank you notes and gift cards and things that, I had just a sweet story. I had a family that gave us $1,000 just to pay for Christmas for our family in I don't know how many years. It was like 5 or 6 years. And if that family didn't do that, we wouldn't have had that much of a Christmas. So that's the kind of thing that just really blesses the people, your leaders in your church, but specifically those pastors' wives. Think about things that would be encouragements and blessings to them, and pursue that for the pastors and their wives in your church.
Yeah, that's so good. Amy, thank you so much for this conversation and for your time today. Thanks for being with us at D6.
Thank you, Casey. It's been a delight to be here.
In listening to this interview, I am reminded how blessed I am, how much God blessed me with an amazing wife who has been on this ministry journey at my side for 28 years. And we are still learning and we are still growing. We continue to fall short. We continue to need to course correct and ask God to turn our hearts to Him, turn our hearts to each other. One thing I think that's so easy in the midst of raising kids and being in ministry, it's so easy to give all your time to those two categories, to the kids and to the ministry that God's called us to. And before we know it, we haven't been making investments just in our marriage relationship. So even here in this year, that's something that Amy and I are praying together about and talking about and saying, hey, we really need to double down on just time with us so that we're not output without investing and putting inputs into our marriage. Well, thanks as always for being a part of Family Vision. Thanks for being a part of our lives. We always love to hear from you with questions or comments or prayer requests. The best way to reach us is through podcast@visionaryfam.com. That's our email, podcast@visionaryfam.com. And we look forward to our next time with you on Family Vision.